Welcome to the Messy City Podcast, where we talk with the people who design, plan, build, develop, or even just think about how to create beautiful, successful, and humane cities and towns. Let's learn from each other and create places we truly care about. Hey everybody, Kevin here. Just wanted to give you a heads up. We had some technical and audio issues on this episode. It's not quite up to my normal standards, so I just want to apologize for that. But I think it's a great interview, and I would encourage everybody to stick with it, and we'll get back to better audio quality in the future. Thanks. Welcome back to the Messy City Podcast. This is Kevin Klinkenberg. There's not a whole lot of things going on in the world of architecture, in my opinion, that really all that good. In fact, to be honest, there's a lot of garbage out there. And it's been a weird time if you're interested in architecture. Really, the last several decades have produced a lot of regrettable buildings. But there are some people who are doing fantastic work, really beautiful buildings on just an everyday basis. And I'm fortunate that I get to know some of those folks and have worked with a few of them in the past. And today I've got my friend Donald Powers on, who's the founding principal of Union Studio in Providence, Rhode Island. Don, how you doing?
Good, Kevin. Thanks for having me. Excited.
Yeah. This will be a lot of fun. I've told other people one of the real benefits of doing a podcast like this is there are people who I think I know a little bit or even think I know pretty well, and then I get to learn all sorts of stuff about them that I had no idea about. So
Yeah.
that's always rewarding. Um, so Don has a great firm there in Providence, Rhode Island, works all over New England and the Northeast, but also has worked around the country. There's a few things I really want to hit on today. Uh, Two areas that I know you have done a ton of work in and have a lot of interest in are courtyard housing, courtyard style projects, and then also affordable housing. You've done a fair amount of work and thinking about affordable housing.
Yeah.
But before we get into that, I do like for people to get to know like who you are and how you took your journey to becoming an architect and doing the work that you're doing now.
Um, that's a great question. I can feel everybody in my office groaning because they've heard the story so many times. But the way I describe it is I had this wonderful initial education at University of Virginia, which when Jack Robertson, who some of you listening, if you're architecture aficionados, you may know, he was the dean of UVA and a very unlikely partner of Peter Eisenman. Um, so sort of the modernist bad boy with a patrician classicist. And so it was sort of an odd couple. Anyway, I ended up working for Jack for a while, which was an amazing experience. And then I went to Harvard's GSD. And I would say that was the shadow side of the wonderful experience I had at UVA, but just as valuable. It was a UVA, Harvard was a place where they were interested in the full and wide exploration of ideas so long as they were very narrowly defined as modernist. And so I came out of that experience and ended up working in Boston with this idea in my head, both as the humanist, traditionalist, and the heroist, modern architect given to me by Harvard, and took my place in the profession, working for a big firm in Boston. And they were dream commissions. They were libraries and museums, and but as I tell the story, at some point after 5 or 6 years working at this firm till midnight at night, designing beautiful handrails and wonderful details, I suddenly thought as I was riding the bus home at night, past all the sprawl and the fast food, and that why were we spending all of our effort on a prep school campus when the problem that I saw was right outside the window on my bus ride home? And so I vowed at that time to sort of create a firm that focused down the scale on the stuff that I thought the real problem was. And I thought the real problem was in the everyday architecture that we were building. So Union Studio was founded with this sort of grandiose idea that we were going to save the world from sprawl by doing really competent background stuff with the explicit idea that that's where the problem was. The problem was not with Bilbao in the Guggenheim in Bilbao, or with the classical country house designed by a wonderful classicist. It was in all the stuff in the background, and so I I came to it with this idea that I was going to put the same level of intention to all of the stuff of our communities as my colleagues coming out of Harvard had put to um, museums and libraries and things. And right about that time, I discovered new urbanism. This would have been around 1991, 92. Um, so that's why the firm was founded, with this idea that we were going to take the ordinary stuff and really be serious about it instead of letting it just be dealt with in a cursory way, as it usually is.
So from a strictly entrepreneurial standpoint, um, how did you go about finding those first clients? How did it's a dream of a lot of people to say I'm going to hang out a shingle and I'm going to do my own thing, uh, but not
Yeah.
everybody has the business ability to do that. So who were those first clients and how did you make that happen?
Okay. So this is a great story, and so as I said, I discovered new urbanism around 92, maybe 90. I had already worked for a number of years, so then I was back in Providence, and I went to my first CNU, which would have been 90 98 in Portland, Oregon. And I went out there and I just thought, I found my people. These are the people that are talking about the things that I've been interested in. Had a great 4 days, ended up flying home completely excited. And turns out I was sitting next to a fellow architect who had been at the conference. And we were talking across this poor woman in the middle seat. And finally she said, "Look, let me move." And so she got out and we ended up talking. And at the exchange in Detroit, to the next plane, he said, "Let me introduce you to my client who's also on this flight." And his client was Steve Maughan. And some of you may know Steve Maughan he's a big figure in the National Town Builders Association, but also a leading light in the new urbanist world. And before we got back on the plane, he had said, "Listen, why don't you come down to Warwick, New York? We got this project going. Mike Watkins had designed it, and maybe you could help us out." And I'm eternally grateful to him because he then immediately acted like the patron in the old Medici sense of the patron. He promoted me even to his competitors. He sold me in a way that was embarrassing to me, as told everybody had done all this work that I hadn't yet done. That told I was the best, best thing since sliced bread. And he just promoted me and kept me working while other clients started to gather around the edges. So I was incredibly lucky to have somebody who found me, kind of gave me work for the first couple of years, and introduced me around to the world of other new urbanists who then started hiring us.
That's really, yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
it's not terribly uncommon in that world. There was a lot of people kind of sharing each other's work and trying to help promote each other. But
yeah. It's
yeah,
one of the things that I appreciate the most about the world of sort of traditional architecture, and in particular new urbanism, is the kind of comparative lack of competition and selfishness that you
mhm,
see in the rest of the profession. It was really collegial and mutually supportive, and I have always appreciated that.
yeah. So I think when I first met you or started talking to you, you were still pretty focused. You were doing a few smaller projects in and around Rhode Island, especially. And I remember you taking me to the courtyard project you did there. Oh God, yeah, I'm gonna
The
miss on this, but the small town near the ocean.
cottages on the green in East
Yes.
Greenwich, I think
Yeah,
is what
yeah,
you're talking about. Mm.
yeah. So talk a little bit about that project and how that came about, because I think that was, by my memory, that was really one of the earlier sort of cottage court housing projects that I had experienced. I know people were doing stuff like that in different places, but it was one of the newer ones or better ones that I'd experienced, and I'm curious how that came to be.
Well, it's interesting because the site was this sort of defunct auto body shop just down the street from my actual house. And I'd been looking at it for years with these ideas that a lot of us have as architects that someday we'd be developers as well. And then Katrina happened. And I don't know if you, I mean, obviously everybody recalls Katrina. And um, Andres Duani convened a sort of skull session of all of the architects that he thought were simpatico with his way of thinking down in Miami. And I went down right after Katrina. And we all basically, the subject of that was how do we respond to Katrina? Um, and I wasn't in the group that actually went to New Orleans, but when I came back up to Rhode Island, I said, this is how I respond. I had this idea about this site. I thought, this is a moment where something radically small and compact could fly. The At that moment, the the economy had crapped out. This was 2007, 2008. I might be conflating my dates because the idea came from Katrina, but the real impetus came from when the market collapsed.
Mhm.
Um, and so, with the market collapsing, suddenly it was either nothing or affordable. And I saw this site and thought, this is a place where people at this moment might be open to a tiny cottage. And the other factor was that this site had been zoned for multifamily, and the town was already rallying to prevent any kind of multifamily on the site. So I immediately saw that there was potentially this market for smaller units. There was going to be headwind for any kind of multifamily, but this might be a perfect location to prove out the point that smaller stuff, semi detached or detached, arranged around a courtyard, would be both what the market wanted and what the neighbors would allow. And both of those things proved to be correct. When we first designed it and brought it in front of the, the public, the lack of pushback was deafening. I mean, every other project I'd ever been involved in, and everyone I've been involved in since, is a fist fight in the public process to get something through. But even the people who came out to object to this thing they had heard about in the paper saw the presentation and kind of were suddenly defanged. The air went out of their sails, and they all conceded, well, this actually could be very nice and very appropriate for the street. So that one, and then in terms of the market performance, because all of them on a price per foot, it was radically high, but on a price per unit, it was very low for that time because these units were radically small. And because we had done such a good job creating a sense of place with the courtyard, people completely overlooked the comparison of square footage cost that they normally do in the market. So that year, 2008-9, I think there were 15 building permits pulled in the town of East Greenwich, and all 15 were from this project. And and they struggled a little bit, but not anything like other projects. We sold or rented all of them within 18 months. And so that sort of proved a concept which propelled us into that dialogue with a lot of developers who were looking for some kind of product type. I hate using that word, but some format that would be palatable to the communities they were working in and would sell. And both of those things came true.
Curious, what were some of the lessons learned, after having that project built, occupied, people living there? What were some of the things that you all saw and learned as designers, or even the developer learned from once it's actually up and running and people are accustomed to it?
Yeah, that's another interesting thing is I say frequently that that project was successful in spite of the floor plans. I if I those floor plan and I was there with buyers who would walk in to the unit and say, "Well, this I don't really like this, and I'm not sure this is going to work, and I don't know about this room seems too small, but you know what? I want to be here. I can make it work." And in no situation I've ever been in since would a buyer try to make it work. You know, in the normal course of events, if you're delivering conventional stuff, if you got the countertop color wrong, they'll walk out the door.
Yeah.
And but the that what that showed me is the sense of place and the sense of community trumped everything that these buyers were looking for. Maybe it was self-selecting in that the buyers who wanted a Garrison Colonial on an acre and a half weren't showing up to the open house. But the people that came through the door, they before they even got into the unit, they were sold because of the quality of the common space and the outdoor space. So that was one lesson that I learned afterwards was okay, you can't push your version of the floor plan on everybody, even though they bought. We've since been much more attentive to what the market says they want in the actual units. But it also reinforced another thing that you cannot spend too much on the common outdoor space, the landscape and the hardscape, and the creating. One thing I always say is that the closer the units get together, the more your separations in terms of landscape and the layers of space from public to private need to be robust and well done. So in subsequent projects, we've added a little bit of dimension between the units, and we've really been rigorous about the landscape. I say somewhat self-effacingly that if the developer is going to cut the budget, cut it from the architecture, not the landscape. I'll make the building simpler, but don't cut it from the landscape. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. Uh,
Um, were there other things about like the size of the courtyard space or that had an impact on it as well, or do you feel like it was more about sort of just that relationship of public to private and the landscaping design?
in the location with the one you're talking about, the cottages on Green, I would have preferred to have more dimension between the units. Right. As it stood, there's about 32 feet from porch front to porch front, which creates a very linear public space. What I had the intuition to do, which ended up working, is dividing that space into several spaces along the length of it that had different uses. And that tended to mitigate against the sense of narrowness of the whole thing. So I think I learned that the dimensions of the common space and the way you treat that are really a function of kind of the transect. And to those listeners who don't know what that term means, that's the idea that there are certain design solutions which are appropriate to one context, but might require something different in another context, whether you're deep in the city or out on the edges of the suburbs. Your design solutions will be different. So in that case, we were pretty well embedded in town right on Main Street. So the idea of it being a little more urban in quotation marks worked. People weren't expecting more as much elbow room as maybe in some of our other projects we've given them.
And what do you see? What did you see that people were actually using that courtyard space for?
Well, that's a really interesting question too, because as an architect, you envision a scenario. I envisioned this wonderful little community where there was a cutting garden and a vegetable garden, and the happy residents would happily be gardening and cutting flowers together, and it would be just the utopia that I, in my megalomania, was certain I could produce. That didn't work at all. And what happened was that these gardens, these fenced-in gardens, became a source of contention in the neighborhood, and some people were keeping them up, and they were resentful of the people who didn't. Um, People just weren't. They were playing by their own rules, and it became a real source of friction. And so the homeowners association, about 2 years after the project was completed, just decommissioned them as gardens and just made them passive green space.
Hmm.
So that was an interesting lesson, that you can't be too prescriptive in your social engineering. You have to create a kind of rubric or a framework that they can spontaneously fill with what that group happens to be interested in.
Yeah.
Um, and so in previous or in subsequent neighborhoods, we've tried to create kind of a looser fit, that here's a space and we'll put a couple of benches in it, but that may become your garden,
Hmm.
in contrast to Green Street. So it's an interesting problem, because one of the dangers of building these cottage courts is you are creating a situation, and you're intentionally creating a kind of informal crossroads, so all of these residents are seeing each other all the time, and that requires a much stronger social compact
Hmm.
amongst all the people that live there. And one bad person in the neighborhood can put the kibosh on the whole experiment. So we've been careful to try to provide more private outdoor space, so that if there's a misanthrope in the mix, they can they can retreat to their private space, and we're not requiring them to sit on the front porch and be social. Um,
So, in the years since then, how many opportunities have you had to do either cottage courts or projects like this that have a courtyard element to it?
Several. The one that most people, if they know anything of our work, know is one up in Concord, Massachusetts, called Concord Riverwalk, and that was, as I was mentioning before, in a much more out of town location, still within about a mile of the center of town, but it didn't feel anywhere near as urban as Green Street. And so we took those lessons, and in full disclosure, Ross Chapin was the original site planner,
Hmm.
and he took it to a point, and we definitely used his work as the springboard for ours. So I want to make sure he gets credit for the site plan. But in the fleshing it out in terms of the architecture and the final landscape plans, we took to heart all the lessons we had learned in Green Street, and tried very hard to give people more discrete and substantial private outdoor space, and more elbow room and landscape layering in the common space, that made them feel, when they were sitting on their porch, not that they were right in the thick of things, but on the edge of the
Hmm.
public space. So that one did very well too, and that was, I don't want to make it too mercenary, but the that really pushed the market, in terms of nobody had seen the sales prices on a per square foot basis that generated. And the market, we was fully always intended to be higher up the chain than the Green Street, which was very much intended to be affordable. Um, but so there was that one, and then the other one I like to talk about is this work we're doing now that's just coming out of the ground in Edmond, Oklahoma.
Yeah, yeah. I was going to ask you about that one. Yeah.
Yeah, and that, the first thing I'll do is give credit to that client, to that developer, Matthew Myers, who is just the client that I've waited 30 years to find. He is so brave and so creative and so committed to doing something good, and he pushes back, um, and it never would have happened without him pushing harder and harder than we thought anybody would let us go. Um, but that one's interesting, because the site didn't lend itself to a single common space around which all the units were organized, and it became a sort of a series of connected walkways and formal spaces and informal spaces. And by all reports, it's just, as I said, it's just coming out of the ground. It's got a huge amount of interest, and it certainly had a incredibly quick, at least by my metric, approval process where the city said, "We love it, build it," and I couldn't believe that they were uh, embracing it so quickly when everything in New England is a fist fight.
Yeah, it's Oklahoma. Oklahoma's a long way from New England.
Yeah,
That must be interesting in a lot of ways, thinking about it's such a different part of the country.
such a different part of the country, but at least in I guess the reputation would be that New England is liberal and progressive, and Oklahoma is conservative and state, and it's not at all been that. The the town of Edmond is an incredibly progressive, interesting town where there's a 1% fund for public art, so there's art everywhere, and there a real civic energy
Hmm.
in the town that Matthew is the best exemplar of. Um, so it's been a different experience, but to be honest, different in a good way.
Hmm.
Much easier to do it there.
And what's the size again of that project? How many cottages is that looking at?
22 units, and
Okay.
they really range from tiny little carriage house units. There are two of those to very small detached houses that are about 1,200 square feet on two floors to larger, substantial homes with tuck under garages from the back. Um, and so that's an interesting thing too, because I think the conventional wisdom on these pocket neighborhoods is that you really kind of need to target a pretty narrow slice of the market. And this is not, this is a very diverse or relatively diverse swath of the market.
Yeah, it's interesting that I think most of us kind of started with that approach and stereotype of those really small units for renters, probably for single people, ideally, and they're awesome for that. They're no doubt they're really great for creating a sense of community for renters, but there's also this other swath of the market that is like families with kids, uh, which require a bigger house or a bigger unit, but uh,
Yeah.
absolutely love the appeal of kind of that off-street shared courtyard space. Um,
It, we found that, for so long, the, the, the real estate market catered to the broad, fat middle. And there was no acknowledgement that there was substantial market at either ends of the broad middle. And what Riverwalk revealed to us is that there are a lot of people who are buying philosophically. It's not just a matter of how well the home satisfies their physical needs. There's a big component of people that are buying to express a principle that I want to live smaller, or I want to live more in community, or I want to live lighter on the land. And we just never, as all of us who are in the world of new urbanism know, we for years we never acknowledged that there was anything other than the middle of the road buyer. And um, it's hard to it's a harder market, but then again, you're not building 1,000 units at a time. You're building 22 units at a time,
yeah,
and there are 22 people out there who want to live in a different way than most people.
yeah, yeah. So the other project I've seen that in Edmond that you're working on is more of a mixed use deal, but it also has some of those sort of courtyard elements to it in a more urban mixed use environment. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, um, great example. Same client, Matthew Myers, and also full disclosure, working with Anthony Catania from
Oh,
AMC
yeah.
Architects. And Anthony came up. We originally recruited him to come out and sort of help us on the ground out there in Oklahoma, and he picked up everything and moved out there to help us with our projects, along with other projects he was doing on his own. But the concept there was again to create this neighborhood, but in a not in the bungalow format to create little urban moments. And so this idea, we call it the paseo, where there's this sort of peekaboo as you're walking down the sidewalk, you turn to your right and you see there's paseo that leads deep into the block. And then once you get back in there, there's a tiny little courtyard we've added a little building for micro retail, which might be an ice cream shop or it might be a coffee, a cappuccino place or something, but it will serve that little courtyard, which is meant to be the kind of meeting place of the residents and the people that are there for the restaurant or from the sidewalk. And we'll see if how that dynamic plays out. But again, every opportunity we took, we could find to create a little moment where the units would add up to be more than a series of residential units, but might be contributing to a little urban community. Um, and Matthew, that was his goal right from the beginning. It was not, he's been rigorous about the pro forma metrics, but only in service of this really wonderful thing that he wants to create. It's been really wonderful. So that's actually just about to come out of the ground as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really eager to see how that goes because as I look at the project, it's kind of a three-story brick construction, mixed-use deal, which it's the what it reminds me of, Don, is it reminds me of like that's like the rendering of the project that you see like in every master plan that you ideally hope is going to be there, but like never ever actually happens because you only ever get like one-story buildings or six-story buildings, in these kind of creations. And a lot of that is there's just it's a really difficult scale of development to make work. I think what you all have shown there is with a sort of a creative approach to design, you're maximizing more of the footprint uh, for saleable or leasable space that that I would think from your client standpoint that must have put it over the top to make it more viable.
Yeah, and he understood the opportunity in that, what not just the necessity to create more, a higher, better use for this, but also the opportunity in that to create something cool and funky and unusual. So, for instance, in the middle of the row of townhouses or live work units, he said, "I want to build the narrowest townhouse in the West." And so in the end, I convinced him to do two of those, or these two twins that are both 10 feet wide to the center line of their structure. So they're actually 9 feet wide on the interior. And that in itself was the coolest design exercise to try and make that believable as a unit. And his cunning was to recognize that I don't need to sell those. I could Airbnb them and they'll go all day long because people always want these funky, unique properties for a weekend. And so both of those little, the world's narrowest townhouses, they front on a little narrow courtyard with a plunge pool in the back, and it's you can just imagine that it's going to be rented forever as an
Yeah.
Airbnb. Um, so the point of what I'm saying is just that he was so creative. I didn't come up with that idea. He did. He thought, why don't we put this thing on the map by doing a really funky thing that every other developer I know would have laid down until the feeling went away. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
But so it's been fun. It's been really fun.
Well, so I guess at a different end of the, I don't want to say of the extreme, but I know you guys have done a lot of work with affordable housing and put a lot of thought into that, and I think that's mostly been in New England. But you can correct me if I'm wrong. But how did you all get into that line of work in working on projects that were classified as affordable?
Yeah. Well, on one way, it was intentional because the mission of the firm was always going to be to try and bring high architecture to those areas of the world that I thought were people were punting on, and one of those was affordable architecture. It just seemed to be to me that when you couldn't do anything else, these architects were throwing up these affordable townhouses that looked terribly. So on the one hand, it was intentional. On the other hand, it was sort of accidental. I met somebody. They said, "Hey, you're a new firm. I'm a new director of my community development corporation. Would you be interested in speculating with me on this neighborhood that we want to build affordable housing in?" And um, that initiated a impulse, which turned out to be an incredible business decision, which I do not take credit for. The muses brought it to me, but we have always given away the initial work to community development corporations. Any nonprofit will work for free until they have a project. And that's not as altruistic as it seems. It's very self serving. They can't get the project until they have something they can show around. And once they show it around, it becomes a real project, and we're sitting there waiting to be hired. But anyway, yeah, so it started in one hand intentionally, on the other hand accidentally, as a lot of people's practices do. Um, we were naive and didn't realize how little the world of affordable housing cared for our script about making it beautiful
Mm.
and well proportioned. You know, when you say that in a room full of low income housing tax credit people, they break into a sweat because they think you're going to spend money you don't have. And so we had to prove our chops that we cared very deeply about the actual affordability, and we could deliver something that cost the same as the other people were delivering, but did so in a way that had a sort of striking um, dignity or unusual attractiveness to it. And um, that sort of built on itself. After the first one, people just kept coming to us, and we've never backed off of that. And we always do it as inexpensively as the next guy. So I now I use it as a case in point that better design doesn't necessarily cost more money. Um, there's this one project, and if you'll, I just want to tell the story about.
Yeah.
There was a nonprofit in the town of Barrington who had been in the midst of a epic battle with the town for years to get this 50 unit development approved on the site of a former elementary school. This town happened to be the well-heeled kind of country club town of Rhode Island, and so people were particularly sensitive to affordable housing. Well, it went to court. It was a huge, drawn-out thing. The CDC ended up winning, and the rejection by the town was overturned. But the CDC recognized that we've won the right to build something, but we're not going to build the thing that everybody hated. So they came to me and said, "Can you redesign this in a way that people would like?" We had to adhere to all of the same dimensional and lot coverage and setback regulations that had been present in the first application. Otherwise, it would be considered a new application that would have to go back through the whole thing again. So we just redesigned it with the same metrics. And when people saw the two plans together, the opposition just fell away.
Mm.
They immediately saw what was trying to be done, that we were creating a public place, not a we weren't throwing down houses like the roll of a dice and trying to create this fiction that everybody lived on 40 acres when their backyard was right in the face of the next person. And to this day, it's one of the things I'm the most proud of, because it has matured into this wonderful neighborhood that people who live there love and the town loves.
So without having the benefit slides to look at and show people, what how would you describe some of the ways in which you've been able to work in that world and still do beautiful buildings? What are some of the things that you have really focused on as designers to try to make a positive impact?
Yeah, well, on that one, the primary exercise was to take all the, you know that term open space, which means nothing. It
Yeah.
just means leftover space. Turn the open space into common space. So we organized. We always try to organize our neighborhoods with a very clear and legible front and a very private back. So you know where the postman is coming, and you know where the kids are going out to play, and those are not the same door. Um, the other things are basic architecture, that you know proportion. When you are limited by cost to um, not being able to do all sorts of zippy roof lines, then you do something simple and square, and you just try to make the detail better. Um, so an example would be, instead of using a vinyl window with a flange that sits on the face of the plywood, use a replacement window and set it back into the depth of the wall, so you can create a deeper shadow line, and then you just trim it out the way you normally would, but with a little return back to the. So that might be too esoteric,
No,
but
that's a great one.
yeah, sort of. So we developed a whole catalog of these, um, what I like to think of as sort of Home Depot approximations of traditional details,
Yeah.
because that's your palette. That's your palette. What
Yeah.
you have to accept that you're not going to be able to do some sort of millwork detail that you can't buy off the shelf at Home Depot. But when you think in terms of the Home Depot as your palette, you start to make all sorts of decisions that really are about materials, color, proportion, one or two good details where they're visible, like the porch. We will kind of dumb down the rest of the building, and then fight really hard for a couple of good details on the porch, which is where everybody sees it as they come and go. Um, uh, and then beyond that, it's just the relationship of these buildings to the street or to the common space, knowing that where you need the landscape, and landscape's a cheap, as I said before, that's a cheap way to give a really surprising dignity to otherwise bad architecture.
Hmm.
I always say the landscape covers so many sins,
Hmm.
and but if you pay attention to that, and let's say there have been times, and I'm going to admit it on to the world, that we've had to use vinyl. Even my saying that will get me branded as an elitist by some people, but I will say we tried very hard not to use vinyl, and the world has sort of caught up to that, because most of the housing authorities don't like it either because of the environmental things. But we've used it before, and when we use it, we put that high. We'll compromise and say we want to use painted stuff below the on the first story up to the belt course, and we'll do vinyl from there up to the eaves, because that's further away from you, and where you need the detail is down where the public is walking by. So it's just that attitude that you don't throw up your hands and say, well, I can't work under these conditions. You accept that that's what the palette is, and then try to prove to people that you can do something better. And the best award we ever got was 2 years ago, the Ray Gindros Award, which is a new award by the Institute for Classical Art in America, Architecture in America, where they created an award for dignified public housing, and we were the inaugural recipient. And I was so proud of that, because I really thought we were kind of doing it. Nobody really noticed. I felt really good about what we were doing. I didn't think anybody really noticed it other than the people that lived there. And to have them come knocking was a huge shot in the arm.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
can't. I can't remember. Did you ever do work or visit Newtown, St. Charles, in St. Charles?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I spent 2 or 3 days there one, and that was a real great experience.
Yeah. So I was thinking about that as you're talking, because that was something that
Yeah.
Tim Bussey, our friend, and who was a town architect there, and Greg Whitaker, the developer, they talked a lot about. Like, most of those buildings are very, very, very simple,
Yeah.
but they said it was for them, it was doors and windows and porch details. Um,
Yep.
And
And I probably, to be honest, I probably got that from Tim because it was early in my career that I was out at Newtown, and I remember Tim talking about, and I remember in particular one of the little cottage courts he had done,
mhm,
where those little two-story cottages were embarrassingly simple,
mhm,
and they were so lovely on that courtyard that I remember walking away from that thinking, I don't need three levels of trim on the eave detail. I don't need
mhm.
cornices above the windows. He really kept it simple and just maybe that's where I got the idea. But
Well, I love the replacement window idea as well, because it's always, whenever you have to really kind of dumb down the quality of materials, the struggle is always like, how do you get those shadow lines? How do you do those things that create depth visually, so that it doesn't just look like a pancake for a building.
yeah, and somebody anticipating what somebody might be thinking. Yes, that detail I'll concede is more expensive than just putting the flange window out at the plywood. But when you're balancing that, you're deciding where you might try to get another bit of money to do this. Those are the high impact places, and that's when you back off on the third level of trim at the eave to pay for the jam return at the window.
Yeah.
And knowing where to put your money is one of the factors that we've learned pretty well.
So you've been fortunate through all this time period now that this kind of fledgling firm that started with an idea and an instinct has really grown, and you've got offices now in two cities, or is it three? Or
It's two. We
okay, yeah,
Philadelphia, and we've now got six people in Philadelphia, and I think we're 32 in Providence right now.
hmm, that's terrific.
Yeah, yeah.
That's
And
terrific.
I just want to say, you know, the other thing I did well in this firm was immediately recognized great people. And the first person that should be acknowledged is my partner, Douglas Caulfells, who is he is really the engine for at least 15 years. He's been the one pushing this while I walk around and evangelize. He's the one making this the firm. And it's a, I really don't think you can do good work without as a single lone practitioner. I mean, you can do good work, but I wanted to have an impact, and that meant I had to find people better than me, and I certainly did.
So do you want to talk real quick about this sabbatical that you just took? It sounded so intriguing. I feel like I got to ask you about it.
Well, it wasn't it. It was engendered by sort of an internal crisis and a couple of health issues that I at that moment I said to my partner, and this is another reason why I'm so grateful to him. I said, Douglas, I really just need to step away for a little bit. It's probably going to be a month. I've got to go deal with some things. And so that was the genesis of it. But the result of it was is so rejuvenating. Like it's now a thing that I'm going to find a way for everybody in this office to do it, because pulling away from your work and getting a little altitude, looking down on it, and then coming back to it with a new conviction about what you want to focus on or what you don't want to focus on is, I think it's critical. And uh, right now I'm on fire again. I had 6 to 7 weeks away from the office. I came back in, and suddenly I found myself, just really engaged and ready to do it again. So I recommend it to anybody who can find a partner as good as Douglas Caulfell's.
But you also detox. It was like a phone and everything detox too.
Yeah, I mean, I just said to myself, I can't do it halfway. If I've got,
Yeah,
if I'm listening for the crisis at the office every time I pick up my phone, I'm never going to
yeah.
get to the kind of um, retreat that I really felt I needed at the end of November. And so I do think there's something to that too. You can't kind of keep one toe in it. And I remember this is somebody might find this interesting. I had a professional coach, and I was talking about how to get the office to the next level, and we had this group of people that I really wanted to become new partners. And she said the best thing you could do for your office and the work you do is for you to disappear for 6 months. Just go away. They don't need you. Uh, They think they do. They don't need you. While you're gone, they will rise up into
Mm.
to fill the vacuum. And it didn't take 6 months. It took 6 weeks.
Yeah.
Everybody just said, "Okay, he's not coming in today. I'm gonna, you know, get this ball rolling." And so I think it was a great thing for the whole office to have me go away.
I think it's an incredible lesson, and giving people the opportunity to step up and see what they can do, but also recharge your own batteries at the same time. And I know, in like the way things are, the way we all live today, being so connected all the time, it's just incredibly hard to just disconnect completely like that.
Yeah, to the other architects who are listening to this, a lot of your job, particularly the public process stuff, is really caustic, emotionally caustic. You're getting accused of things and rejected and yelled at for ruining neighborhoods, and when you're trying to solve, so it you have to minister to yourself, or take care of yourself, because the constant drumbeat of deadlines and critics and budgets and can really sap your enthusiasm. And that's what I found. I found I was sort of getting tired of fighting the good fight. And who knew it only would take me a couple of months till I'm ready to get back in the ring.
So what's next on the horizon then for you and for the firm? What do you have looking forward?
Well, we continue to have more work than we know what to do with. We've got four new partners, who are, as of uh, the middle of the year, now full partners. Um, we are, as a lot of firms, and this might be interesting. We have growing pains, and we're trying hard not to lose our commitment to kind of fine grained, smaller urbanism as the projects that come to us are bigger and bigger in scale.
Yeah,
And there's a lot of pressure to work on bigger projects because they're easy to make them you know be profitable in the office, or but we're really committed to not leaving behind the smaller incremental developer who needs us. So we're looking for ways right now to balance to kind of return to our roots a little bit. We got in this, we got in about a year and a half of all these big multifamily projects, which
hmm
one of our partners correctly pointed out one day, is this really what the world needs? Is another 60 unit multifamily building? And of course they need yes, they do. They need that, but they need courtyard housing, and they need um, townhouse housing, and they need a new fire station. And so there's plenty of places where we can put our efforts, but we're trying to be very careful about not losing our mission in the momentum of a firm that's growing. It's
yeah,
very hard to do.
yeah, yeah. There are those funny sizes in architecture firms where there's like these thresholds that you cross.
Yes.
You know,
So that's the other thing. We and I my metaphor, or not metaphor, my analysis is that it goes in 10 to 12
yeah,
in, employee increments,
yeah,
where the firm you were at 12 is a completely different firm at 20. It's now, and you can't run it the same way you did, and you can't think of it the same way. And now we're at 38 total, and we're really trying to find a way to not lose the boutique feel and attention that we had earlier.
yeah. Well, your success is well earned. I've admired your work from afar for quite some time, and I think if you're in New England and you're not familiar with the Union Studio, you need to get familiar. But I think anybody interested to see um, these approaches to courtyard housing, to affordable housing in particular, I know you do a lot more than just that. But take a look at their work, and I think you'll be really really impressed. Don, if anybody wants to get a hold of you or look you up, what's the best way to find you in the firm?
Yeah, my email is don at Union Studio Arch. That's arch.com, all one word. Or you can also find me through the website, which is unionstudioarch.com. Um, but before we get off, Kevin, I just want to thank you for you've had in the time that I've known you, you've had several different careers in and around the world.
No kidding.
But one of the things you have been consistently since, I mean, I don't know when it was when I first met you, but it had to be in the maybe the Providence CNU. I don't know, in 2006, but
Yeah.
in whatever iteration you're doing, you're kind of this pillar. You're fighting a good fight in several different arenas. I don't know how you keep doing it, but
You take a lot of hits when you fight a lot of fights, but you got to find a way to keep going. And
yeah,
if it's worth doing, it's worth fighting for. So,
yeah. Well, you're definitely doing that. So
yeah,
thank you for that.
yeah. Thank you. It's appreciated. Don Powers, thanks so much for doing this. It's been great to talk to you.
Okay, Kevin. Thanks.
Bye.